Hello, this is Jennifer Corey, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Living with Heart. And today I have the supreme privilege of introducing you to one of the mentors in my life, one of the people whose work and books have really influenced the work that I'm doing, and that is Dr. Rick Hanson. And Rick is a psychologist who is also the author of a number of books, 5 books, including Buddha's Brain, Hardwiring Happiness, Resilience, and a forthcoming book on Neurodharma that I'm hoping we'll get a chance to talk a little bit about. He's also a senior fellow at the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley. He is an expert in positive neuroplasticity and contemplative neuroscience. And there's so much more that I can say about you, Rick, but let me just bring these 2 things to bear. One is, I noticed as I was preparing for today, and I was writing out the title of each of your books, which might be the first time I've actually done that there's a bit of a theme going on here, right? Buddha's Brain, Practical Neuroscience of Happiness, Love, and Wisdom. The next one, Hardwiring Happiness, New Brain Science of Contentment, Calm, and Confidence. Resilient, which I just want to reveal this to you, Rick. I would not show this to just anybody, but I'm going to show it to you. But How to Grow an Unshakable Core of Calm, Strength, and Happiness. Now, all of your books look like this, but this is the one that I grabbed for today. I don't know if this is terrifying to an author.
Oh, I love it. I love it
to see
already.
this, or if it's comforting, but it is, when I tell you marked up, my friend, it's
That's
truly
great. I love a reader like that. That's how I read, by the way, nonfiction. Fiction, I just blaze through it, but nonfiction, I bring a pencil.
Yeah. So this is pen. So there I am underlining things in pen, and I've got a whole system, 2 dots if I want to come back to it, 3 dots if it's incredibly important. I literally write stuff in the margins if I want to make sure that I commit it to memory in that moment. It's a whole system. But anyway, oh, and then Neurodharma, your forthcoming book, which will be out on May 5th. Is that right? May 5th?
Yes.
The New Science, Ancient Wisdom and 7 Practices of the Highest Happiness. So the thing that I noticed that was in common with all of these was this pursuit of an integration between contemplative practice, neuroscience, and happiness, really. And in a way, I wondered, well, is there space in the middle of a pandemic for us to sit here and talk about happiness? And of course there is, because we're not talking about necessarily the kind of simplistic or hedonic form of it. But I thought I would start by asking you, and this is just really a personal indulgence of my own, please tell me what brought you to the intersection of these 3 areas.
It's because they are at the center of those 3, right? So let's say modern psychology, the perennial wisdom from around the world, and modern brain science. The intersection of those 3 has the most useful stuff we can draw upon when things are at their worst and as it is gradually cultivated for a life that is at its best. It's the same, right? The same insights into how to grow inner strengths like happiness, love, and wisdom. Happiness is an inner strength, including its ordinary hedonic forms. It regulates stress, it protects the immune system, it draws us into connections with others, it being happiness broadly, as well as grit, compassion, motivation, commitment to social justice. Those are things we can grow. And as we grow them, they're really useful when the oatmeal hits the fan. And as we grow them, they draw us increasingly into the upper reaches of human potential. So it's not either or, it's really both and. And just, I guess for me, I've always been an explorer in a funny kind of way. I lived on the edge of the hills when I was growing up as a kid. That's where I wanted to be. Where I live now is on the edge of open space. In my own life, growing up in the 60s and 70s, a time of great ferment in this country, I've always just been interested in what's out there. What's the next step? When I'm a rock climber, when I go into wilderness, I'm interested, what's up there? And I love to learn from people that are a little farther along. For example, we met at the 10th annual gathering of the Masters in Positive Psychology program at UPenn, and which for me is like, Mecca for positive psychology, certainly in America. And here we have people there like Dr. Marty Seligman, farther along the path, certainly in an academic sense, who turn to the rest of us and say, hey, come on up. The view is magnificent. So in that same spirit, I wanted to write a book that was both really down and dirty in terms of the trenches, in a good sense, like really useful in everyday life, while also honoring and not giving up on the aspirations and the inspirations for the pinnacle of human possibilities, which has been mainly marked by the contemplatives of the world's traditions, East, West, and secular, but which is available for everyone.
Oh my gosh, I love those words, the pinnacle of human possibilities.
Yeah. And at this time, right, we need to be both able to deal with the crud. Sorry to interrupt you there, but I'm just like jazzed about it. But also throughout history, when things are at their worst, people long for inspiration about what is still always true underneath it all. And people also long for inspiration about how to relate to what is happening in a way that is free and not hijacked or preoccupied. Right? And at these times, people more than ever draw on the profound wisdom of the ages that's been cultivated around the world. They draw upon it more than ever.
So that's a beautiful segue into why we are here, to talk about what can neuroscience and the ancient wisdom really teach us about how to navigate this time. Rick, for those of us living here and now, this feels unprecedented.
It totally is. It is unprecedented.
But not in terms of all of humanity, right?
No, that's correct. In America, it is unprecedented.
In America. And by the way, like I was thinking, the next biggest thing I can think of, I live in the greater New York, New Jersey metropolitan area, is 9/11, of course, right?
Yeah.
But even that had the difference of people being able to sort of come together, be together in a particular way. We've never really had this where everybody gets isolated or separated out, physically distanced in this way.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about this time that we're in and what neuroscience, first of all, can we start with what can neuroscience teach us about acute stress and chronic stress? Maybe we're now 6 weeks in, at least in the Northeast, we're 6 weeks into a lockdown. Can we talk a little bit about the changes between the acute period and what's happening in the brain and how we're responding to it? And then what happens when it starts to feel more chronic and what I call like moving into what can feel like a weariness?
Well, I think there's some big headlines and kind of loosely ordered, but in no particular order. Neuroscience research tells us that there is a world of difference in terms of impact on the brain and the body and the related impacts on the mind. There's a world of difference between being identified with an experience, let's say of anxiety or resentment or friction with someone we're living with, and experiencing the same amount of irritation or anxiety within a frame of spacious mindful awareness. It immediately functions as a kind of circuit breaker or shock absorber in terms of the impacts on the brain. And in fact, as people experience whatever they're experiencing right now with steadiness of mind, which is the first of the 7 practices in the book because it's so foundational, as they experience that, whatever they're experiencing, this is not about suppressing or denying, whatever they're experiencing in that way, what actually happens is that they gradually grow as a trait over time, a sense of kind of calm, resilient well-being. So neuroscience teaches us that. Second thing it teaches us is that stress accumulates when we're identified with the experience we're having. It adds up over time and it's problematic. Things that we can put up with for a day or a week or two really start to add up over time. I think of the metaphor of dragging a fingernail across the back of your hand. The first time you do it is nothing. The first 100 times you do it is nothing. After 1,000 times, you approach for the next one and the hand wants to pull away because it's pink and it's sensitized. So that's a real thing. Neuroscience also teaches us that emotionally positive experiences are fantastic resources when the going gets tough. When the going gets tough, the tough turn to emotionally positive experiences to keep on going. Emotionally positive experiences like camaraderie with others, You and I were talking about how a lot of people are letting their hair down. A lot of people like me are getting longer hair just because, there's no haircut for a while, Although our daughter who moved home recently from New York City is eyeing my locks and saying, I could help Dad. I really could give you a little help. Anyway, so my point is that that's an emotionally positive experience. Camaraderie, sense of gratitude for what we have already, a sense of respect for the endurance and the fortitude we're bringing to all this. That's an emotionally positive experience.
Rick, to that point,
Yeah.
would you share with people what you said when we first came on before we started recording?
Oh, I was laughing that I was just happy that things worked. It's a little bit like that with regard to our technology on Zoom and the microphone and all that. It's a little bit like putting the key in the ignition of a car and it turns and you're like, thank you, that's good. I'm glad, you know what I mean? It's little things like that more than ever that are useful. They're useful to appreciate these days.
So I'm glad that you said that, because I think that
Yeah.
it would be very easy for people to think, oh, great, I never meditated and now I don't have a mindfulness practice. And so I can't use that spaciousness that he's talking about. So would you talk a little bit about how we can cultivate it really in the here, what I like to call the magnificent in the mundane?
All right. Well, mindfulness is really easy for a breath. So it reminds me of the saying that the great way is easy for one with no preferences, right? So mindfulness for a breath is easy. It's 4 breaths in a row or 10, but it gets really kind of interesting. The short version is that I'll actually do a little practice with you that I love. I call it 3 breaths. So there's the first breath, the second breath, and the third breath. It'll take more than 3 breaths for me to explain it, but we'll just do it together. And neuroscience tells you that these are good things. So the first breath, be aware of breathing, particularly in your chest or upper body as a whole. That's the first breath. Then in the second breath, as you breathe while remaining aware of your body, bring to mind the feeling of caring for someone, a friend, child, a pet. You like them, you have compassion for them, you love them maybe. That's the second breath. Okay. And then in the third breath, while being aware of the body while you breathe, also focus on the feeling of being cared about in a simple way, not complicated, feeling liked, feeling appreciated, feeling loved. Great. So I want to call out 3 things there. First, that was a mindfulness practice. People were being mindful, which is simply sustained present moment awareness. Second, that was a cultivation practice in the sense that we were deliberately cultivating certain experiences of awareness of the whole body as we breathe, which neurologically does some really good things about calming down inner chatter and the default mode network and rumination, and bringing us out of the future and the past into the present in an uncomplicated way. Also, we were cultivating feelings of caring flowing out and feelings of caring flowing in. So we were having those experiences. The third thing that was happening there is that a little bit at a time, we were internalizing the experience that we were having by staying with it to gradually turn that state, that experiential state of feeling caring or cared about, into trait lovingness, gradually hardwired into physical changes in the brain. And that illustrates right there the power and simplicity of things that take a dozen or 2 dozen seconds. And then the power half a dozen times a day of accumulating those little episodes over the course of your day, including the acquisition of trait mindfulness, trait lovingness, trait calm, trait gratitude. You develop those as traits over time through doing these little practices every day. And I think that's fantastic. We have that power, which is more important to use than ever when we are so powerless about so many things outside us.
That's a beautiful, absolutely beautiful practice. And I remember this is the acronym HEAL, H-E-A-L?
Yeah, that's
Yeah, the
right.
acronym is HEAL for it. I love this practice. What it brought to mind as we were doing it was somewhere like a cross between a loving kindness meditation, which is you're taking in and you're going out, and also the self-compassion, Kristen Neff's work
Yeah,
on self-compassion. You know, I often invite people to add the element of physical
mm,
touch to it,
yeah,
because of what gets released, you know, when we
yeah,
have that sensation of being touched.
yeah.
And
That's right. That's great. And the Neurodharma book I came to initially as a book that's really about the upper reaches of human potential. And I'm making a picture of a mountain here. That's kind of how I think of it. There are the dusty plains, the swamps, and the lower foothills, and the smaller mountains, and the real pinnacles. And I think it's important to not give up on that possibility, you know? And still, that material is more relevant than ever. It's so relevant to resilience and just functioning these days. So that's all really, really true. In the context of that book, to me, there are just three big takeaways for this time. One is to find your footing, see clearly, make a plan, cope. That's really important. Do not deny the negative. The second is to calm and center. When we're shaken and the times are turbulent and we feel rattled, we can't make good choices. Calming and centering can be done really quite easily. One way, as you probably know, is to do a long exhalation, which naturally engages the parasympathetic branch of the nervous system, slows the heart rate, and soothes us. Calm and center. Pull up the body memory. Let's say of a time you were just endured, you got through something. We have, almost everyone who's living through this right now has gotten through tough times before. Maybe not exactly like this, but tough times before. You got through tough times before. You can do it. You will get through this one. There will be another side. And who do you want to be on the other side of this? Which could well be a year or so from now before the major consequences start to sort of settle out, economic and public health wise, both. Um, the third kind of headline these days is tend and befriend, drawing on Shelley Taylor's work on stress and different ways of managing stress besides fighting and fleeing. Tend to others and befriend them. That's another major headline right now. And all those have good brain-based research on their benefits and the details of it. But the essence is really simple. And we can do this.
will you say what happens for people in the brain when
Yeah,
they are tending, befriending? I always say
that's
that
great.
like an antidote to depression really is service, like to
Yeah.
you know to really reaching out to other people, allowing us to expand. But I think it would be interesting maybe for people to know
Yeah.
what's actually happening when we're doing that.
That's great. Well, so one thing that's happening is an increase of oxytocin related activity. That's a particular neurochemical, oxytocin. And one of the two things that are kind of headlines here to take away is that as oxytocin activity increases, anxiety tends to decrease. Good. Second, the amygdala, the alarm bell of the brain, there are two of them technically, has receptors for oxytocin. So when those little molecules, like small container vessels, dock there on those receptor sites in the amygdala, they have an inhibitory effect. The brain functions, as you know, essentially like gas pedal and brakes. So the brakes, it's inhibitory. That means that oxytocin activity calms down the alarm bell. So we're less likely to initiate a stress response. So those are certainly two key things that happen as we feel more related. Another thing that happens that's interesting is the sense of pain decreases. Uh, the emotional pain and physical pain are downregulated through positive social contacts. So positive social supplies are analgesic in a sense. And as a total sidebar, literally in studies, they've done studies where they essentially assign people to two groups, the treatment group and the control group, and then they expose them to a social stressor of playing a game with Confederates who are cheating and beating them, and then how mad do you get, right? If you give people in the treatment group Tylenol before you expose them, rather than a placebo sugar pill, before you expose them to that social threat, they don't feel as mad or hurt by it.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
Yeah, so if you calm down the physical pain systems and the social pain systems intertwine. So it's a two-way street, which is totally weird and cool. So that's the thing that happens. Gosh, I could go on. I'll just maybe I'll just pause right. Well, yeah, one more thing that happens. Since you wanted to know, I mean, I could go on, but I won't, trust me. Well, we have the vagus
Save it
nerve
for my
complex.
PhD, Rick.
That's good. That's good. Well, and the thing is, you don't need to know the details. In my books, I really summarize stuff. I bury the reference notes in the back if you want to know more. But these are different ways to actually be a body-mind process. So many people pay lip service to the mind-body process. They're mindful of their body, great, but that's only half of it. Like being aware of body sensations, great. I train in that. I'm good at that. I teach that. Yeah, that's half of it. What about the ways that that we are body full of mind?
Yeah.
That to be truly a body-mind process is to appreciate what's going on in your body and then become a little more skillful on that. So vagus nerve complex, people have heard about that. 2 branches, ancient branch goes down from the brainstem, regulates the heart, the viscera. Modern branch goes up into the face, very involved with the social engagement system. Great. What that means is when we're tending and befriending, we're engaging the more recent branch of the vagus nerve complex that's involved with social engagement. Effects in it ripple downward into the more ancient branch, which is calming the heart and protecting the lungs and managing digestion in a way that is resting and soothing and replenishing. So here too is a way in which in the brain, positive social experiences are really good for physical health and including protecting the immune system.
So we know that those relationships and connections are so important, and yet here we are in a time where people have to stay physically distant. And of course, aren't we blessed that we have this technology? You know, Rick, I've heard people say we're all in the same boat, and I could not disagree more. I like when I hear you refer to this as the storm. We are all in the same storm, but we are not all in the same boat. People have different levels of, you know, access to technology, access to support, economic issues. Very, very sadly, I have a cousin who just passed away, and boy, do I understand right now the complexity of not being able to be near one another. They can't even be near him or his children, or this whole added element to it. And so I do think that it's really important that we offer people a number of different ways of being able to navigate this incredibly difficult time. There are some people for whom this is an opportunity for a hard reset on their life, a chance to step back. For other people, this is a period of great despair so I think that understanding this science is incredibly important, and I'll tell you why. It's not because I think everybody wants to be a scientist. It's because I think science in some ways is like parallel to God, you know? And if science says it, if your grandmother says it, meh, but if science says it, you know? So I think the idea that we can offer people something substantial to support why we're saying this is really important. This is not just some parental advice, but that we actually know what the impact of this is. So that brings me to the question about people who are more alone than others. You know, some people, the families are gathering and they're delighted. Some people, the families are gathering and there's a lot of struggle there. And some people are not gathering at all. And so what are some of those real practical things that, you know, can you think of things that we might be able to offer people? Because when I think of what the potential negative outcomes of ongoing stress that it doesn't get interrupted in some way. We know what that is, right? The amygdala and the hippocampus. And so I would rather, as a psychotherapist, I would so much rather prevent and promote than intervene later.
So, well, what you say is deeply true and poignant. I mean, I'm incredibly privileged. A lot of my experience right now, I mean, we've had huge disruptions. I have a book coming out. I had 32 in-person events. Those all had to be canceled. Some of them have transformed online. We've had to scramble. You know, we've lost a lot of revenue that was going to come in from many, many sources. And so I'm dealing with it. On the other hand, my life, it feels like glamping in some ways. We're camping, we're inconvenienced, but in a very comfortable suburban home in Northern California. And I really try to keep in mind that my experience of this is trivial, compared to what so many have had to deal with. I mean, it pierced my heart. I saw a picture actually yesterday on Twitter of a child, 5-year-old child, daughter of a frontline healthcare worker who died of COVID-19. And it just pierced my freaking heart. What a beautiful kid, you know? And so this is really true. It's also true that there's a world of difference between solitude and loneliness. And as you know, loneliness is a huge health risk. Sustained experience loneliness is bad for physical and mental health. So what can people do? I think they can do a variety of things. One, they can appreciate the context that they do have. And if it's with someone, let's say with you and me online, to do what they can to help it feel as rich as possible. When you're flipping through Facebook or social media, or when you're, as my neighbors are, howling at 8 o'clock at night. I don't know if you're doing it where you live, but it's quite common. You
This
know, the
feels
first
very
time
California.
yeah, we're like California.
We're banging pots.
Okay, banging pots. That's great. Something at, you know, like, yeah, yo, or you see people on the street. I notice that people are friendlier in a funny kind of way, you know, 10 feet apart, but they're friendlier. Feel it, first point. And there's this huge fundamental dynamic that's the movement from state to trait, from experiencing to learning, from activation to installation, right? And it's so important when we're having these beneficial experiences, particularly if they're a thin soup these days, when something does come your way, slow down to receive it in yourself. In the saying, keep those neurons firing together so they start wiring together as well. So that's really important. Another is to bring up the emotional memory of being with people who care about you from the outside in. We can do that. And so you just bring it to mind, disengage from the whole movie about it, disengage from the story, disengage from the fact that the last time you talked to them, they ticked you off, let it go. Just zero in on, you know, behind their aggravating personality, the caring, the friendliness, the love that's there for you, if that's the case. And really feel it. We can do that at will. We should do it at will, to just take a few breaths, a few minutes perhaps every day to kind of marinate in the genuine feeling of being included or seen or appreciated or liked or even loved. Third, we can get in touch with the outflow of compassion and kindness for others. And love is love, whether it's flowing out or flowing in. Remarkably, caring feeds us like being cared about feeds us. There's a lot of overlap between the psychological nutrients or nutrition of that experience, those two experiences, you know, caring or feeling cared about. So deliberately bringing to mind.
I love that.
People, yeah. I try to keep in mind they're scared too, they're stressed too. We're in this together. So those are 3 things that people can do right now on their own that to help buffer the impact of the isolation these days.
One of the things I heard you talk about, maybe it was in your with your son Forrest. You have a beautiful podcast.
Yeah, being well. Yeah.
There's something about the dynamic too, this father and son having what feel like these rich conversations between the two of you. I feel like my ear is against the door a little bit, and I absolutely love it. I think it's so beautiful. I love that you're having this experience together. Yeah. One of the things I heard you and Forrest talk about was, how do you want to remember this time? And I heard you say it a little bit earlier, but I didn't want to interrupt to ask you to say more about that. There's something about the power of prospection. Like, what can we do something about, right? Isn't that an antidote to helplessness in the moment?
Yeah, definitely. Agency of some kind.
This agency, what can we do something about? And I was thinking, well, here's something, right? Is that we could allow ourselves to think forward. How do I want to remember this time? And maybe this is one of the places where the ancient wisdom could be so helpful to us, because again, this is novel to us, but not novel to humanity.
Yeah, I think that, I think it's a really good thing that you're bringing up, and to bring it down to earth. It's sort of like when we go to bed, usually at night, I'll just say it that way. When we go to bed and we look back on our day, is it a day that we feel glad about in a general way, right? And glad about not so much the events in it, like that's part of feeling glad or grateful for it, as we sort of review the day. But are we glad about how we met the day, how we showed up to it, how we uh, reacted to it, but then recovered from those reactions? It's the recovery from reactions that matters really so much. We're going to get triggered. As a friend of mine put it, in talking with another person, he said to this other person, "I'm sorry I punched your buttons here. I want to acknowledge that I pushed your buttons here, but I did not install them." And he could get away with it with a good friend. And it's my friend who said that. But the key point is really good. It's
Yeah.
to realize, yes. And so my larger point is that flip it around, we're going to have reactions, right? Our buttons have gotten installed and then other people bump into them. We're going to have reactions, but how quickly can we recover? So will we be glad when we go to bed about our practice over the course of a day? Do we bring a little practice to the experiences we were having, to the events we were in? Do we bring character, good character, to our interactions, to our efforts, to our, is there sincerity there? Just without being a saint, do we basically feel glad about how we were this day? And then when we do experience that gladness, to literally quote, as best we know, the Buddha from a long time ago, find gladness in your goodness. When you recognize what is good about you, be glad about it. Not because it's egoic and vain, actually it makes you less egoic and vain.
Yeah.
You really appreciate the goodness in you, because then you feel less that you have to prove it to others or, impress them every day.
We can really take that for granted, can't we? If we do it, if we're not proud of our behavior, we don't feel glad, we can just hold on to that forever. If we are glad, it's like, yeah, check, and you just move on.
Right, and you just move on. But instead, feel it. And so however we mark this time, like I am quite current with the public health experts and what their predictions are. And barring a possible but quite unlikely medical breakthrough, we are going to be grappling with this as America probably for at least another 6 to 12 months at a public health level in significant ways. And then we're going to be grappling with the economic consequences of this for at least a year or two, both the consequences to our country and then what's going to be happening around the world as markets for American products or producers of supplies for American products are in the developing countries of the world are just overwhelmed by what's going to be coming their way. So we're going to be dealing with this for a while, but it's a period of time that's really measured in 1 or 2 or 3 years-ish. We're still dealing obviously with the consequences of 9/11. We'll still be dealing with the consequences of this, but the big ones, the big waves will have passed. So we will get to the other side. How do you want to, when you look back over the last month, do you feel glad about it? When you look back yourself, whoever you are, Jennifer, Rick, other listeners, when you look back from this time in December, during the holidays, let's say, what do you want to be happy you see about your own behavior? And do you want to be happy that you saw prudence? Do you want to be happy that you saw fortitude, right? Do you want to be happy that you saw forbearance and forgiveness, dealing with others who are really freaking out too? Do you want to feel glad that you were able to find that sweet spot where you disengage from divisive hatefulness while also having the moral courage to say what you say and speak truth to power? Will you be glad about that, right? That's how we want to be. And that's our opportunity every day to be that way without being saintly about it, but realistically that way. And it builds self-respect and it gives you something to focus on that's within your power.
Oh, I love that you're saying that. There are so many things about what you just said that I love. I'm so glad I'm recording it. I'm going to go back and listen to it again. But the thing that really stood out for me was that it's a choice.
Yeah.
We bring a kind of conscious, we can be so stuck in the mud of this.
Yeah.
We can forget that if we can just pull our heads up for a minute, we actually make choices. And maybe if this were only going to last a week or two, then we could sort of stay in that reactive stance. And, it might not be ideal, but it would be quick. Then you could do the reflection later and grow from that. But we're going to be here for a while. That's what I hear you saying. We're going to be here for a while, and we can awaken just a little bit, bring some consciousness to this. We can actually begin to make intentional choices. But I love that prospective idea of who would you like to be on the other
Yeah.
side of this, and looking back from there. I think
Yeah.
that that's absolutely brilliant. I think it brings us to this last of these questions.
Do you mind if I interject something right there that
No,
you prompted?
are you kidding? Not at
Oh,
all.
oh no, just well, I'm appreciating that you're appreciating this. So and what it reminds me of is this comment I encounter from time to time, where people who say, "Wow, what you're talking about, Rick or Jennifer, seems like a lot of work, right?" Or, "Wow, people really have to be conscious all the time." And I think, well, in some sense, yes, but mostly what I'm talking about is a handful of times every day, where you just slow down to be self-aware and then receive into yourself whatever's useful. But more generally, I was thinking about a bus driver, right? Who to me deserve tremendous respect. Just one of the hardest jobs I can imagine, but we kind of take it for granted. Oh, the bus driver. So that person is alert, they're reading what's happening, and they're competent at it. They're navigating all kinds of inputs coming from around them and even coming from inside the bus, God help them. And they're managing it. And we expect them. We expect them to have that basic level of competency. I mean, to put it a certain kind of way, this is not a job where we think, oh, like a brain surgeon or a rocket scientist, it's like a bus driver, but we expect them to be basically competent, to be attentive and on the ball. Well, is it such a big ask then to ask ourselves to bring the same attentiveness and competence to our own thoughts and feelings, to our own reactions, to the events of our lives? And to me, it's not such a big ask to ask people to be a little self-aware, a little reflective, a little able to step back from their reactions and to observe them and make sense of them and to nudge them into a better, less harmful, more enjoyable, more useful direction over time. That's not too much to ask. And it's so funny. We routinely ask it of people in their golf game or their tennis game, or or driving a bus. No disrespect to driving a bus, and yet we kind of shrug at the idea of calling ourselves to a similar level of competence with regard to our own stream of consciousness. It's like the bus drivers dealing with the stream of traffic. Why don't we call ourselves to even a fraction of the effort and self-awareness of a bus driver when we manage the internal traffic of our own mind?
No, Rick, I think that we have, first of all, don't you just love that it is our shopkeepers and our cashiers and our bus drivers, in addition to healthcare providers, who are being seen right now and looked at with so much gratitude? If my garbage men didn't come twice a week, I can only imagine the added complexity of what would be happening right now. I hear their truck come in the morning and I have so much gratitude.
Oh yeah.
These young men are out there working, and that the cashier, the young, men and women, the young people who have been, kind of marginalized in some ways and I told our cashier in our local grocery store, you're our hero right now. You know that?
Yeah. I know, it's really interesting. Gosh, we could just talk. I mean, you're such a pleasure to talk with. If you'll forgive me, here's another quick point, which strikes me about this time. I think for a lot of people, as you say, there are takeaways from this time. And one of the takeaways is that I think at both the personal level and the societal level, there's a huge wake-up call that we've been propped up artificially as long as the music was playing at the individual level by our activities and settings and interactions and the experiences that would come. But and that was fine while the music was playing, right? But as soon as the storm came and the music stopped, and so many of those props were pulled away from beneath our feet, whoa, what we're left with is what we've grown inside that's durable, that stays with us. Our traits of self-worth and calm and contentment and resilience and love already. And for many people, when they look inside, the wake-up call is, wow, it's kind of an empty cupboard. I wish there were more there. And so it's an important lesson for people going forward is the need to invest in themselves and to really focus on turning experiences into lasting learning, social emotional learning that is truly internalized so that it becomes unconditional. It's not based on external conditions. It's not based on the music playing. That's a big takeaway, I think. And that's why your work's really important in part because it highlights that going forward. The other, for me, big takeaway is that similarly, we as a country, America, and in many other countries around the world, we have not been investing in the common good. And in fact, we've had a 40-year sustained politicized attack on the web and the fabric that ties a society together with attacks on government at the highest level as if it's, you know, a terrible evil rather than the way we come together to solve problems together. And also attacks on things like scientists, expertise, the media, truth-telling, journalists, and so forth, with a lot of divisiveness, including most recently, as you well know, during the 3 years of the Trump administration, major attacks on pandemic, epidemic preparedness and the whole public health system around it. It's just been eroded. So it's as if we've been living in a house now for 40 years that looked all shiny and pretty from the outside, you know, open for business. But inside, a bunch of highly motivated, politicized termites were eating away. And it all looked good until the wind started to blow and the rain came, and now the hurricane, which is upon us. And we realized that through lack of investment in the common good, the body politic, we are now exposed to terrible, terrible consequences that will kill unnecessarily tens of thousands of Americans, let alone millions of people around the world. And I think there are huge lessons there as well, that we need to invest in the common good in a whole new kind of way, including, much as you said, respecting the people who have not had high status previously, the forgotten cashiers, the forgotten bus drivers, the forgotten garbage collectors, the, you know, just the people who keep everything going, the frontline healthcare workers. I think about the people pushing a broom down the hall at 3 a.m. As really absolute part of the healthcare system, and how important it is to include them in our consciousness with respect going forward.
Yeah, I like when you talked about this in some other pieces that I've heard you speak on, as struggles or challenges paradoxically being this opportunity for us to remember the big things.
Oh yeah, that's exactly right. You know, lots of little things have fallen away. Like, you know, wait a minute here, I can't get cream for my coffee. What? You know, or Amazon's gonna be 3 weeks before I get that. What? You know, what we're left with, to me, is exactly right. The big things, including our opportunity to help others and to have a large heart instead of a small one, a pinched one, you know, to have an open heart instead of a closed heart. That's a big thing. Or I look out, and where I live, it's kind of like a zoo at this point, a little bird seed goes a long way. And, you know, even though we humans, we're stressing and freaking out and all that sort of stuff, the turkeys in my backyard, they don't care. The golden fox that came through the other day, they don't care. The squirrels, the birds, they got other problems. The lizards, the ants, they got other issues. The clouds that are blowing by, you know? And to me, those are some of the big things. Yeah. As well as a nice thing like this, like you and I are connecting here. Last time we saw each other face to face was 3 years ago. How good is this?
I can't believe that much time has gone by. Okay, so I have this little James Lipton thing I do. Remember Inside the Actor Studio? So 3 rapid fire questions at the end. Okay, so one is, could you give us an example of one of your personal best practices? In other words, what is part of your refuge right now?
One that I learned about the why of, and even the how of, in writing my Neurodharma book, is the power of getting a sense of things as a whole. Getting a sense of your body as a whole, getting a sense of the room as a whole, raising your gaze to the horizon. These are little tiny things we can do. And then you train you move from state to trait. You develop more and more a sense of trait, whole being. And in doing that, it's like immediately calming. It's a circuit breaker to a certain amount of stress and self preoccupation, just the sense of the body as a whole, the room as a whole, or the totality as a whole. That's incredibly powerful. And it might sound abstract, it's very sensory, it's very felt. And you can immediately, as soon as you do it as a person, within a few seconds, certainly within a couple dozen seconds, you'll notice a difference. I do that.
Rick,
Another,
honestly, as soon as you said it, I felt this calm just wash over me.
yeah, it's a fantastic, simple practice, no
Wow.
matter what. That's a major go-to for me. Another major go-to is to deliberately, more than ever, open to what I do, what I feel grateful for. In other words, precisely because there's so much that's bad, general sense, it's really important to recognize what is also true. That is good. Like, you're gonna laugh. I made cookies. I don't think I've made a batch of cookies from scratch in forever. So I used almond flour and, coconut oil and honey. And I was so happy. My daughter, who's a great cook, was just laughing at, no, Dad, this is how you roll the balls to make cookies. I'm fast. I'm a dude. I'm like one ball in each hand. It's twice as fast. Like, no, 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 Dad, you got to do it right. Do it right. I'm like, oh, okay. They tasted great. I'm like, oh, almonds. Where did almonds come from? People had to domesticate almonds. They used to be poisonous. So over time, they did that. Thank you. People made the almond flour. Thank you. Coconut oil. Coconuts. Those got domesticated in various ways too. Coconut oil. What a cool product. Honey. Weird little insects. I love honeybees. Weird little insects make this thing. Thank you. Right? So to me, more than ever, it's important to be grateful for that. Okay, sorry. Definitely did not give
That's
you a short answer here.
But you answered the second question too, which is, can you tell us what you're most grateful for today? Would the same thing about
Oh,
the supply or the technology?
no. Well, that was just an example of stuff you can be grateful for. And okay, good. When the big things are going to crap, it's more important than ever to appreciate the little ones. In part to fuel yourself to deal with the big ones.
Yeah.
Really important rule.
My friend Corey Muscara, who wrote the book Stop Missing Your Life, talked about the willingness to notice what's not wrong. And once you mastered that, you can even notice what's right.
That's really great. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so what am I most grateful for today?
Yeah, today.
Man, it's a long list and there's a lot of stuff tied for first, but okay, I'll pick one. Just one thing, right? Let's see here. I'm really grateful, honestly, for my family, my wife, my daughter. Our son just moved out while our daughter moved in, but he's certainly in my heart. Like, it all turned out really pretty well. I feel really grateful for that and grateful that they love me.
It's a beautiful gratitude. It is so beautiful. And it's so easy to not notice. And how wonderful to awaken to it without there being something being wrong with them, or, it's so nice. Okay, third and final question. And that is, given the present circumstances exactly as they exist right here, right now, can you tell me, what is it that you hope for?
I hope for a reckoning. I hope for a lesson. I hope for I hope for a hitting bottom, much like the alcoholic. In a funny kind of way, you could say that there's been a loose parallel here to the process of addiction and hitting bottom, and then the turnaround that begins there. And my hope is that there will be a reckoning, there will be lessons learned at the personal, but especially at the community and national and international level. And my hope is that the heart of that reckoning will have two aspects to it. One is a return to respect for the sacredness of truth, the sacredness of facts, what is actually the case. It's the foundation in any domain of effectiveness and wisdom, is to be grounded in what's true as best we understand it, rather than delusion or ignorance or motivated bad faith to obscure the truth. And the second thing that I hope will really happen in the reckoning here is a new appreciation for the ways in which individual security is embedded in collective security, community security, security as a people, as a society, as a nation, and with a whole new appreciation for the importance of investing in the common good, and which means really respecting everyone, just as you said earlier. So those are my two big hopes for this time. We'll see if they come true. We could blow it, but suffering is a great teacher. Crisis is a teacher on the other hand. Not to mess with your program here, but I think as a country, America, we drew mainly the wrong lessons from 9/11, and we then reinforced them in our response to it, including the second invasion of Iraq, enormous disaster. So I hope we get good lessons from this time. But I think that's our opportunity.
Rick Hanson, thank you so much for your time. Really, this will be one of the things I'm not only grateful for today, but throughout this entire time. I know that we would not have had, I don't think, this conversation at this moment. And I'm so incredibly grateful for your willingness, for your wisdom, for your steadiness. Thank you so much for that. Thank you for the reminder that this will pass. Yeah. We will come through the other side of this. Now the question is, how would we like to come through? Thank you for the reminder that.
And who will we be as individuals and as communities, as a country? Yeah.
And we don't have to do it perfectly. And that we don't have to do it perfectly, Yeah. So I love that check-in at the end of each day. It's really wonderful. And the parallel to addiction, I agree with you 100%. I haven't heard anybody say that before, but you are right on. So may there be good sponsors set up.
That's right. That's exactly right. Well, thank you, Jennifer. Thank you all who are watching this or listening to it.
Yeah, thank you.